Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tuesdays with Rachel. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to tweak a lesson to make it fit your child's learning abilities. In this lesson, I'm going to spend some time talking about tweaking the lesson for a strong or gifted learner. Next week, I'm going to focus on adjusting a lesson with the struggling learner in mind. Before we get started though, if this is your first time with me, let me introduce myself. My name is Rachel. I have been homeschooling for 15 years and I have 4 children. I have a very strong learner. I have an average learner who's a little lazy. Does anybody else have any lazy learners out there? That's fun, isn't it? I have 2 struggling learners as well. And if you have more than one child, you have already learned that each child learns a little differently, don't they? Fortunately for me, I have been blessed with the extremes in my family. The diverse differences in my children's learning abilities, their strengths, their struggles have affected every single subject that I've taught over the years. So I have had to purchase a variety of programs, a variety of spelling programs, different reading programs, science programs, writing programs, you name it. Why? Because I have learned that some curriculum works really well with one style of learner, but doesn't necessarily work with the other kids of mine and their styles of learning. So I would need to go out and purchase another curriculum that would work with them. That being said, I have not needed to do that with my math curriculum. RightStart Math has worked for all of my kids, regardless of their learning style bend. Why? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that RightStart Math uses a very hands-on approach. It helps kids to explore math, discover math. It is not relying on strict rote memorization. It provides challenging lessons along the way. There's visual, auditory, kinesthetic opportunities for kids to learn in the lessons. And because of this and much more, RightStart Math has worked for all 4 of my kids, and all 4 of my kids have learned math very well. That being said, just with all curriculum written, RightStart Math lessons are written with the average learner in mind. So as a result, I have had to learn to tweak the lessons along the way to fully meet the specific needs of my strong learner, average learner, and struggling learners. For example, my strong learner, I needed to keep him challenged. I couldn't move too slowly through the lessons or he would get bored. My average learner, I needed to keep an eye on when things were too easy and when things were too hard. I also needed to develop his analytical skills. For my struggling learners, I needed to teach lessons at their pace, which was not necessarily my pace. I needed to provide them with extra helps along the way as they needed them. During this session, I'm going to focus on the strong learner and how to adapt the lessons to challenge them and to keep them from getting bored. If you have an average learner, I still recommend that you view both this session and the session I'm going to do next week on tweaking lessons for the struggling learner, because each student has his or her own strengths and struggles. And you may find that one math topic comes very easy for your child and you want to challenge them. Conversely, you may also find that some math concepts your child struggles with, so you'll need to give them some additional helps along the way. In order to give you a glimpse of how I look at a lesson as a parent who needs to make slight modifications to the lesson, I'm going to look at one lesson in particular and share with you how I look at it from the perspective of a teacher teaching a strong learner. Next week, I'm going to use the exact same lesson and help you see how I look at it for the struggling learner, or with the struggling learner in mind. The lesson that I'm going to be using is from Level B, Lesson 93. Okay, so here you can see the lesson. This is the full lesson. I'm going to pull each section out separately so that you can see each section closer up. So here is the warm-up section. Immediately, my eyes go first to those first 2 questions, problems. And for my learner, my strong learner, Brady, I would just give him both of these problems. Now, if your child is really good at solving multi-digit addition problems with carrying, you may choose to only give them one. For my son, I gave him both. And to challenge him, what I did was we would have a race. He would do the questions or problems, I would do the problems, and we would see who can solve them the quickest. Sometimes I would have a timer for him. He loves competition, so it really worked for him. But sometimes I would have a timer on and say, let's see if you can do these problems faster than you did yesterday. So that was kind of how I added a little bit of a challenge to his warm-ups. Now, warning, if your child gets a little flustered or has some anxiety with a timer or competition, do not use it. Those are just things that I used with my son because he loves competition. But if your child is not competitive and gets a little overwhelmed with that, you do not want to cause that frustration and anxiety. So find another way to excite them and get them to work through these math problems with more fun. The next thing that I would look at are the equations in the next paragraph. And I would immediately look at 14 minus 7 and 17 minus 7. And I knew when I was teaching my son these lessons, I knew my son knew these. So I did not ask him these type of questions. If I wondered, well, I wonder if he knows what 14 minus 7 is, then I might ask him. But most of the time, I just kind of skipped through that paragraph. And I would jump down to the next grouping of questions, which were almost always a little bit trickier. And in this lesson, you would see 12 minus 7, 13 minus 6. Again, if you know your child knows those math facts, skip it and move to the next section. If you're not sure, maybe ask one of them. Like I would probably have asked the last one, which is a little harder, which is what is 13 minus 6, to see if my son knew it. If he knew it, I'm moving on. If he struggled with it, I might go back and ask that what is 12 minus 7, just to see how he's doing. My son never really struggled with telling time. So I didn't necessarily go through these type of questions. If I wanted to spot check to see if he knew it, I wouldn't get the geared clock out. I happen to have an analog clock in my classroom. So I would say, hey, Brady, what time is it? And if he could tell me, I would just simply move on. This here is the meat of the lesson. This is where, for most students, this is where they're learning, okay? But a lot of our strong learners and gifted learners kind of have an innate knowledge of this information. So I would actually go straight to that first paragraph and look for that question in there. And in this particular lesson, the question is, what is the difference in quantity between 4 and 6? So I would ask Brady, what's the difference between 4 and 6? If your child knows it without using the abacus and they're just shooting out the answer 2, then I just drop down to my next section of questions, which is repeat, what is the difference for 9 and 2? If when you ask that first question, what is the difference between 4 and 6? If they struggled, if you saw some hesitancy, they're not quite sure, then I would do that whole section of lesson as written, and then drop down to the next question. So if they went through the first question fine and you get to this question and this causes some struggle or hesitancy, then again, linger on this. Do this section as written in the lesson. Now let's say your child did what's the difference between 6 and 4, just like that. They did what is the difference between 9 and 2, just like that. Then I thought up a challenging question for them. And it would be something like, what is the difference between 18 and 25? This would be totally off the top of my head. Notice though, I jumped from single digit numbers to double digit numbers. I expanded the challenge for them to see what they could do with it. And sometimes my son would get it, sometimes he wouldn't. In this case, if he did not get it and he wasn't sure, then I would get the abacus out. So I usually had the abacus there anyway, but I would get the abacus out and we would walk through that. If he got it, then I would just move on to the next section of lessons, which is the problem and practice area of the lesson. If my son has done well up to this point, I would kind of like assign this problem, if you will. I would say, okay, I'm going to read you a word problem and I want you to write up part whole circles and write up a couple equations when I finish reading this. So get out your part whole circles and he would draw them. And then I would just read. Michaela has a book with 36 pages. Nathan has a book with 50 pages. Whose book has more pages and by how many more? and then I'd let him go and see if he can solve it. And then if they struggle, first of all, let me back up a little bit. If I see a little bit of struggle, I would let them kind of work through it a little bit. Make sure you don't jump in too fast. Let them noodle it a little bit. See if they can't figure it out. They love to puzzle things together, so don't rob them of the joy of puzzling it together. If, however, you see them start to struggle or they're kind of heading the wrong direction, then you can jump in and start working through this section of lesson as it's written. Once your child has finishes this section, the last portion of the lesson is the math card game. And here we have them playing the harder difference card game. If your lesson time is almost up, you have, however many minutes that you're working through the lesson. And if that time's just about up, then go ahead and play this card game and you're done with the lesson. If, however, you have flown through that lesson and you're like 5 minutes into the lesson, 10 minutes into the lesson, and your child's like, okay, I'm ready for more. What I have done in the past is I just flip over to the next page and I look at the lesson. I just get a glimpse and I see what's being covered and see if there's any similarities from this lesson to the previous lesson that we've done. And I'm looking here and I'm seeing, oh yes, I see where we have two different problems where we're doing addition and subtraction problems and the part whole circles. So I probably would just jump in on this lesson. And I see here we have 4 different problems that we're solving. So we're kind of taking what we've learned and applying it for more opportunities to learn and practice what they've learned. But I would not do the warm-up. I would skip through that warm-up. I would just jump right in on those problems. After those problems have been worked through, then I would go back to the card game and play that with my son. So that's kind of gives you some ideas of how I changed up some of the lessons. I added some challenges, and I showed you 2 challenges that I did on a regular basis with lessons. One was I added a harder equation. For example, when I said, what's the difference between 18 and 25? I wanted my child to solve a more difficult problem than what was listed in the lesson. Another thing that you saw that I did was I did more than one lesson that day. Now, not every day can you do that. There are days when you're working on one subject like subtraction, and the next day, the next lesson over is on geometry or on multiplication or who knows, fractions or something. So it may not be cohesive and it may not work well to do 2 different lessons during that day. So there are other things you can do to add a challenge to the lesson, to the day, to their math class, or each week. One thing would be to go on a virtual field trip. There's all kinds of great videos online, YouTube videos online with different math topics. So if there is something that's sparking an interest in your child that you've covered in the math lesson or just in conversation, go on a virtual field trip, get some more information about that topic. There was a gentleman I spoke with in Pennsylvania several years back who had a gifted son. And in fact, he started RightStart Math when he was 2 years old. And I remember we would email each other over the years. And one time he was working with his son, I think it was on prisms. And the lesson would cover a certain amount of prisms, and his son would draw them and then create them with the geometry panels. Well, his dad wanted to challenge him a little bit. So he said, why don't you create a prism that you have not seen in the math lesson today? So his son did. He built this prism out of the geometry panels. And so when his dad emailed me and he goes, here's what my son built. Is this a brand new prism? Is this in existence, or did he discover a new prism? It took a little while, but I went up online and we discovered that it had already been discovered. And I gave him the really long, it was like 30-letter name. I don't even remember what it was now at this point. But take your child on a virtual field trip, give them a challenge based off of what they've already done in their classroom. Study a historical mathematician. There are a whole bunch of mathematicians out there. Have them do some research about it. What makes them special? What was it that they discovered? What about having your child create and solve their own word problem? You can give them parameters, focus your word problem on this concept, or open it up. Say they can create a word problem for mom to solve later on, or for dad to solve later on in the day. Just giving them something to do that's a little bit more creative, a little bit more problem solving, but looks a little different. A lot of these kids, strong learners and gifted learners, they love puzzles, various types, and each one has their own favorite types of puzzles. And fortunately, in this day and age, we have resources for all kinds of puzzles out there, online, books that you can buy from the bookstore that list a whole bunch of different types of puzzles that your son or daughter can work through. They can also use our math card game book. There's some puzzle games in there that they can play that will change every single day. And those are fun for my older son enjoyed playing those games. Find more challenging math card games. Let's say you're in level A and you're working on addition, simple basic math fact addition, basic addition facts. And your son or daughter are just nailing those. Maybe you can challenge them with a subtraction math card game, or maybe multiplication math card game. Give them a fractions math card game. Topics that they have not even covered yet, but might challenge them just a little bit. And another interesting idea would be have them create and write their own math card game. We have several students who have done that over the years, and Dr. Cotter loves to see those games. And I believe she's even incorporated and shown those on blogs and things before. So finding other elements, other challenges that you can add to a math lesson is fun. It's a little bit more effort on your part to think, but your child will eat it up. I do have a couple words of caution though. Sometimes with a strong learner, you are flying through these lessons. You're flying through segments of these lessons. Make sure that you don't go too fast. These kids also need, even though they're learning really quick and they're absorbing that information really quick, make sure you don't go so fast that they don't have time to digest the information. They need to have time to let it kind of simmer, if you will. So give them that time. Don't fly through so fast that they're just not retaining that information. I was a fast learner. I loved cramming for tests. I was just really good at cramming for tests because I was a really good short-term learner. But the problem is 24, 48 hours later, 36 hours later, 2 weeks later, I would forget the material. So make sure you don't go so fast that they're losing what they've already learned, which means you probably should also review often. A lot of the levels, especially the older levels, have like almost a weekly review section. If you do not have that in your particular level, make sure you go back 10 lessons, 20 lessons, 30 lessons, and give them just a couple problems that they've done previously. Give them opportunity to review their information, but keep it short. Don't spend the entire day on that. Give them just a few problems and then move on if they've got it. If they don't have it, you know you need to go back and review it a little bit more. Play older card games. My kids loved it when I did this. So let's say you're in D and you're playing multiplication games, more multiplication games. Then you're kind of like, do they remember their addition facts? So go back and play like Addition War, something that they've played before, they know how to play, and it's kind of fun. And you can kind of get a pulse on whether or not they've retained those addition facts. Your goal through all of this is to inspire them with challenging math, but also keeping their love for math going. Don't challenge them so much that they are getting overwhelmed or getting frustrated with the material. At the same time, don't go so slow that they're not being challenged. You want to inspire them to learn more. So finding that balance is a little tricky, and you might find one week is different from the next, but make sure that you are keeping that goal in mind. Let me flip back to me, and we'll finish out this session. So I have given you some ideas of changes that you can make to the lesson, some ideas that you can incorporate while teaching your strong learner math. I hope you were able to get some ideas that you can apply to your homeschool. If you have any questions or concerns, I hope that you post them here on this Facebook page, or you can email me at Rachel, R-A-C-H-E-L, at rightstartmath.com, and we can converse that way. If you found this video helpful, I hope you click the like button. And if you know somebody who has a strong or gifted learner, share this video with them so that they can apply some of these ideas with their children in their homeschool. Join me next Tuesday as I talk about how to tweak lessons for the struggling learner. And until then, I hope you have a great week, everybody.